wanna cut me down. I'm gonna send a blood,
So good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to this webinar this evening, on this cold and wet evening. I hope we'll entertain you, inform you, provoke thoughts, and encourage you to share your experiences and views with us. So my name is Mamta Patel. I'm a business leader and director of DRI. I'd like to start by explaining that this is the second of a series of 4 webinars, which we're considering as a sort of virtual conversation with the community around the issues we've all been hearing about this year, looking at the disparate health outcomes we've witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic, and what we need to do about those. In today's webinar, our focus is particularly on fair access to employment and promotion opportunities. These webinars have been commissioned by the Disparity Response Programme of Sussex Health and Care Partnership, which is made up of all 6 NHS trusts and the local authorities. They're being organised and co-hosted by us, by Diversity Resource International, which is a BAME-led organisation with a mission to support ethnically diverse people to overcome challenges and learn to thrive in society to the best of their ability. So before we carry on, can I just remind you all of a few housekeeping rules? To improve your Wi-Fi connection, make sure you turn off other devices and close down any other browsers, which will ensure the best quality engagement. Keep your microphone on mute during the entire webinar and your camera off if you would. Please feel free to use the chat function to ask any questions. We have a team of people ready to look at the chat function and take any questions that you've posed, and they'll forward them to me as chair. If you have any issues, please do click on the Zoom support button or email training@dri.org. And please do tweet about the event as much as you like, and details on how to do this are in the chat together with the relevant hashtags. So to continue with the event, and just by way of a scene setter, we've all heard many times through this year phrases such as disparate health outcomes, BAME vulnerability to COVID-19, structural racism, cultural competence, and so on. Sometimes I think we just need to stop and really feel the impact of such words. The cruel truth is that those who most need to earn often have the least choice of how to do this. So a few points that I've gleaned from the coverage that I've seen and the reports that I've read on these issues. Poverty seriously reduces the choice you have in the work that you do and your ability to work even if you don't feel it's safe. Protecting your job for the sake of your family can mean you accept circumstances and workplace behaviour that others would not accept or do not have to. Cultural and economic circumstances often dictate the extended family households we live in. We now know that in a pandemic, this makes us extra vulnerable. Even if you've taken steps onto a career path, there are many cultural and racial barriers to enable you that you need to make to enable you to make the right choices for you. This can affect your well-being in many ways. So we're going to talk about, even where you have got jobs, what are your choices? What are your opportunities within that? In our last webinar, we discussed the situation particularly for workers in the NHS. And this evening, we want to broaden that out to consider employment and promotion opportunities in both the public and private sectors. But firstly, Tanya Brown-Griffith is going to say a few introductory remarks for us. Tanya is Programme Director for the BAME COVID-19 Disparity Response Programme for Sussex Health and Care Partnership. And she's going to talk to us about the reason for commissioning these webinars and what they hope to get out of them. So thank you, Tanya. Can I hand over to you now?
Sure, thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me. So
yes.
as Mamta said, my name is Tanya Brown-Griffith and I'm the Programme Director for the BAME, or Black Asian Minority Ethnic Disparity Response Programme across Sussex Health and Care Partnership. Now, Sussex Health and Care Partnership is a partnership comprised of all the NHS organisations across Sussex and all 3 local authority areas. It includes health and social care. We formed a partnership because we want to deliver population health together and in partnership across the sectors. As part of the response to the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on our ethnic minority community, the partnership quickly established a BAME disparities program. And what we've been doing is working really hard with our communities, with our health and care sector partners to come up with a program in place to address some of those needs that include health inequalities and race inequalities. And we know that there are also wider social determinants, hence why we're all here tonight to talk about employment, access to employment, and progression through employment. We know that there is a very strong link from employment to health and well-being. And what we want to hear from our public is, what are those current challenges? Where have you had good experiences, but where have those experiences not always been good? What is the access to jobs? What are the situations you face when you are in work? What is your experience whilst you're working with your colleagues? And also, what response do you get in terms of training access, development access, and progressing? If you're unemployed, we also want to know, what are the challenges you face accessing work? What are the challenges you face accessing services such as the job centres, services that support you into work? And what support would we as a health and care partnership offer to you? So I want to invite us all to have a really good conversation this afternoon. We look forward to seeing all the comments, all the feedback, hearing from all of our excited panelists who are on tonight. And we will wrap all of this up into a report, which we will then be able to look at and plan particularly robust actions that we want to take forward. So I do encourage you all to be as frank as you can so that we can really take things away with us to work up some really good plans and share back with you. We also want to hear whether those plans have actually made a real difference. So thank you all for joining, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the session. Thank you, Mamta, back to you.
Thank you, Tanya. So let's move on to our first set of speakers. We have three more inspirational women who will also join me for the panel discussion after they have spoken. So we have Sandra Kerr, Barbara Harris, and Laureta Lake. First to go on is Sandra Kerr. So let me just introduce you, Sandra. Sandra was awarded an OBE in 2012 and a CBE in 2019, reflecting her career in tackling race, gender, and disability equality issues in government and business. She's currently race director for nationwide outreach organisation Business in the Community, which promotes good social and environmental governance in companies. Prior to this post, Sandra worked in the Cabinet Office advising on equality, diversity and inclusion across Whitehall, and previously worked at the Department for Work and Pensions. So Sandra, I think you're going to present to us a really good national context for our discussion this evening. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Mamta, and thank you for the kind invitation. I have a few slides that I hope are going to be shared. So I'm going to use this opportunity to just set the case for change. So can you go to the first slide, the next slide, please? So I'm using this to really set out, why do we need to talk about race? What are some of the challenges? What we have seen is the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare some of the challenges and the systemic issues that have been spotlighted by campaigners and research and reviews for many, many years. But some other things that have come out is around the terminology and the term BAME, Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic, and ensuring that that doesn't mask a non-inclusion of Black people. And then we know from the McGregor-Smith review, which was published in 2017, that actually if the UK can tackle all the disparities in the labour market, it's worth 24 billion per annum to the UK economy. And when we think about the challenging times, the more inclusive that recovery, the better for us all. We know through McKinsey's recent research, diversity wins is actually 36% better bottom line returns. And we know that there are pay disparities by ethnicity group that needs to be tackled. And then if you look at the pyramid, This pyramid shows what the demographic breakdown of the UK looks like. And you can see in primary and secondary school age, the 1 in 4 young people are from an ethnic minority background, 1 in 8 are of working age, but only 1 in 10 are at work, because again, there is an unemployment gap. If you are from an ethnic minority background, you're more likely to be unemployed. And then only 1 in 16 when we look at the top tables. Next slide, please. So what we are doing, we've been working with employers, and one of the things we've done is published a 1-year-on report from the McGregor-Smith Review scorecard, and we did this with our Race at Work survey, which had more than 24,000 responses. This survey was originally launched in 2015, and some of the findings that we found when we ran it again in 2018 was 52% of ethnic minority people feel like they need to leave their current employer to progress, 70% saying progression is really important to them. Only 33% of employees said that there was someone at the top table who is committed and taking forward equality and fairness. When we asked, would you like a fast track? When we asked ethnic minority employees, 43% said yes to this. And when we asked the question overall, is your organization comfortable talking about race? Only 38% said yes. So this survey highlighted some real challenges, and we use this evidence to establish the Race at Work Charter. And another key stat was only 11% of employers were voluntarily publishing their ethnicity pay gap. Next slide, please. So we use the evidence to establish the Race at Work Charter with 5 key principles based on evidence. Need to appoint an executive sponsor, so someone at the top table who ensures that this works and that, you know, it's talked about and not left to languish just at grassroots. The second area is data, ensuring that transparency, pay transparency, bonuses, you know, the whole lot, and we're actually encouraging it's de-aggregated by ethnicity groups so you can scrutinize any pay disparities. The third one, board zero tolerance on bullying harassment. So really ensuring not only they're safeguarding their employees, but ensuring that as they engage with clients, there is support from the organization to ensure good practice, because the survey actually found that 1 in 4 people said that they'd experienced bullying and harassment from their managers in the last 2 years, and that was the ethnic minority respondents. And then the fourth commitment was managers promoting equality. They're often the gatekeepers to progression opportunities, so really need to have them engaged. And then the 5th commitment was supporting the progression of ethnic minority talent, with 70% wanting to progress, as you can see, a huge priority. And we also asked YouGov to run the insight on qualifications, and people were qualified, so that's not the problem either. Next slide, please. So what we did, with the brutal killing of George Floyd, employers asking us, what can we do? What should we do? What I did was run the data from the Race at Work survey on what the Black respondents said. What do the Black employees tell us? And I published Insight. This report is free to download from the Business and Community website. Some key stats, 31%. So when we asked, would you like a sponsor? So this is somebody who can put you forward for opportunities, who's in senior rooms that you're not in, put your name forward for roles. 31% of Black employees said yes, they'd like a sponsor, in contrast to 12% of white employees. When we asked the question, what do you think will be a career blocker? 33% of Black people said they believe that their ethnicity would be a blocker to their next career move, compared to 1% of white employees. So a huge disparity here, huge difference in lived experience that causes those beliefs. And another big issue that I think every employer needs to look at is attribution. So getting credit for your work. The question was, do you feel you get credit for your work? 49% of Black employees said yes to this, compared to 57% of all the other ethnicity groups. So there's this is linked to when you make proposals, you make ideas, and nobody listens, and then somebody else rewards your idea and gets the credit for it, or you're overlooked for promotion. So there's a real issue around attribution of credit, because of course when we look at top tables, you cannot see Black employees. So there's something there. And then the 34%, 24% is 34% of Black employers are more likely to wait for more than 3 years for any promotion at all, in contrast to 24% of white employees. And then when we asked Black employers about fast track, it was 50%. So 50% of the workforce wanting to progress. So this is not about a lack of ambition. Next slide, please. So what we've done in this report, there's some calls for action. We're asking for pay gap reporting, mandatory pay gap reporting, people to sponsor Black talent in the workplace, have conversations. We're going to run the Race at Work survey in 2021. So we'll be able to hear exactly right now what employers are saying. We're encouraging the setting of targets. And I must say that the ethnicity pay gap reporting and the target recommendations are the McGregor-Smith ones, review ones. We're just amplifying those again, including Black enterprise and supply chains, and also encouraging organizations to sign a Race at Work charter, which has moved from 250 to almost 550. Next slide, please. So really just coming down to a landing on the slides. So we ran, what we did with every year, we've run a survey of employers who signed the charter. This year, 114 did the survey, and that, that volume of employers covers 1.4 million employees across the UK. Strong themes around leadership and accountability, transparency, and we're calling on more organisations from education, construction, technology to sign the charter, because there's not as many on signatories as there should be. And then the final slide that I pulled together on this is really just I'm going to talk to you about, so you can take that down now. Thank you. And I'm going to share some of the points that I've made really about what practical action can you do, because we're talking about progression. So I think setting targets not only for recruitment, but progression, and setting them using benchmarking data, so using the demographic data, so local population, and making sure you are tracking every stage of the process. Because what you will find is where where the individuals fall out. So what you find sometimes it might be an attraction problem. Maybe people aren't applying, or they do, but they don't get through the sift, or it might be they get through the sift, they don't get through the interview. And I think that principle needs to be applied not only for recruitment, but for promotion too. I think another important issue, remember I talked about the 33% and 1%, we really need to ensure now diversity on selection panels. There has also been a number of mystery shopping mystery shopping research on CVs, that if your name sounds Muslim or African, you've got to put in more applications. So I think there's also a case to make sure you've got diversity in the SIFT panels. The evidence from the Royal Society has proven that more diverse teams make better decisions. And what we have found is that employers from both public and private sector who have done this have reported more diversity in selection. Other things that we're encouraging is mentoring, two-way mentoring, reverse mentoring, and as well as sponsorship. So we know through the surveys that we have run that every time we ask, would you like a mentor, would you like a sponsor, Black and Asian employees are more likely to say yes, and actually more likely to say they get something positive out of that relationship. And then also a real important issue is how can leaders ensure that when they're making decisions that are going to affect particularly Black people, because the evidence is there's a real absence of them around the key decision-making tables. So employers need to find a way to, number one, plan the pipeline to grow the talent, to sit around the table, but in the meantime, how are you going to access those voices? And then a couple of other things I want to suggest is one of the big things that we saw over the summer was Black and white people outside saying we want difference. So I think there's a real opportunity for organizations to mobilize the allies in the organization who want to see change and who are prepared to use their voice. And we're finding employers are creating tools and community to support employees to do that better in the organisation. And then, of course, you must have an action plan, and you must have some targets, and you must have an advisory group whose job it is to track progress. So it's not just fanfare, oh, we have targets, and then nothing happening. So I'm going to stop there. And one of the other things is the conversations. Got to create safe spaces so that when things go wrong, people can speak up. And I'm going to flag here one of the things we know from the Cabinet Office Ethnicity Facts and Figures website. In 2014, 29% of Black women, it said, in any 1 week would report a common mental health disorder, and that was in 2014. What is going on now with this pandemic? We don't know, but it shows that there really does need some action. We've got some funding, and we're hoping to pull together some toolkits for individuals and employers around just kind of, simple steps really to help to manage people's well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. That was a brilliant scene setter for the conversation to come, and it really does show the commonality of issues between public and private sector, as we saw last time as well. So I'll move on now to our next speaker, who is Barbara Harris. Barbara Harris is Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at Brighton and Sussex University Hospitals. She started her working life as an admin assistant in the pharmacy department of Brighton General Hospital, and has built her career over the years to become Head of Inclusion. So I think Barbara's got a very interesting and interesting story to tell, and I think we're going to speak to her afterwards about some of the lessons she's learned. So Barbara, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and good evening. As Mumtaz has just highlighted, I started within Brighton and Sussex University Hospital some 25 years ago, initially on a 2-week placement as an admin assistant, and then moved into pharmacy. It was a really good job, and I'll be honest, if it hadn't have been for the untimely death of Stephen Lawrence, I wouldn't have known anything about equality and inclusion, and possibly may have still been there. But unfortunately, those shocking events happened, and it opened my eyes to, I may be okay, and my little family may have been okay in Brighton, but it ignited a spark, and I wanted to do something. And soon afterwards, our organisation started a Black and minority ethnic network and called for people to become involved, to which I did. I became really interested, became a founding member of the original network. But then through the work that we started to do, realised that it wasn't just issues around Black and minority ethnic people, but it was wider. So I was fortunate that I was able to cajole and knock on the door of HR colleagues to get support to learn more, and eventually be able to get a secondment and move tentatively into the equality and diversity field some 12 years ago. And when I look back at what I didn't know then, I'm surprised that they took the risk and the chance on a very enthusiastic, but I look back and realise how little knowledge I did actually have around the inclusion agenda. But I think we've all moved on in the last 12 years, and I'd like to think that I've certainly developed and helped support my organisation to move through to become more inclusive. We know that there is a lot more that needs to be done. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a few stats around what it's like to be Black and minority ethnic within BSUH. I should also highlight that I do also work and support the inclusion agenda at Western Sussex Hospitals, but I'm going to focus primarily on Brighton, if you're happy with that. So we have a workforce of nearly 10,000 staff, but just over 1,600 of us identify ourselves as Black or minority ethnic. And we have 9 Agenda for Change bands, sort of bands 1 to 9, and then very senior managers and clinical areas. The vast majority of our BME staff would be around about band 5. So that would be on a salary of around about £27 10,000. And so I say the vast majority. That means that there are a few that are higher, but there are significant numbers of staff that are at a pay band that is lower than band 5. And I think I speak for many in the NHS where we recognise that that could be sometimes seen as the glass ceiling for many people. And myself, along with other equality leads in Sussex and other parts of the country, we work with our organisations to make a change around that. But I think it's also worth noting that in an organisation that is nearly 10,000, that does mean that we are the size of a small town, so that there is the potential for progression, and there certainly is within BSUH, which is Brighton Sussex University Hospitals. We also have a thriving new BME network. We have a workforce race equality standard working group that looks at workforce equality standard, which is a set of metrics that all NHS organisations, particularly provider organisations, have to report on annually to see what the differences are in outcomes between our white staff and our black and minority ethnic. And I make the distinction black and minority ethnic because this is around BME. It hasn't widened to black, Asian and minority ethnic. And there are areas where we know that we need to improve, and I'll be honest, they are the areas of moving people higher than from band 5. What are the things that are stopping people within our organisation from progressing the way that we want? And Dame Marianne Griffiths, who's our Chief Executive, is working closely with Yvonne Coghill, who until recently was the National Director for the Workforce Race Equality Standard for NHS England, to see what are the rocks in our shoes that are progressing our BME staff. And as you would expect, we've got a working group and an action plan, and we're working to address those issues. And through also working with Tanya and the rest of the people in the Sussex BAME Disparity Group, we hope to improve, as I'm sure others do within the area. I will come to a question later, but what I would say is it's not always easy being a person of colour, BME, BAME, however we like to address ourselves in the UK, and the NHS is no different to that. We are a microcosm of wider society. But what I would say is, in the same way that I have been able to develop from a very junior role within the NHS to now a senior leader within the organisation, there is optimism and hope and support that is there that can enable others to follow where I have in their chosen fields, or to join in fields completely different and to move throughout the organisation. Hard work, support, but we do have mentoring. More will come on board in the coming year. Not an excuse, but a reason. A lot of things that were due to come into play this year, understandably, COVID has, made us a little bit further behind than we wanted to. But there is the commitment of our chief exec and our executive team. And I think that's one of the really strong points that BSUH has, is that we have recognised where we've had failings. We are deep diving, looking into those, holding our hands up, but carrying on and wanting to support our BME communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Okay, sorry, can you see me? I think you can now.
I can.
Great, okay. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And what struck me was your comment about the spark at the beginning of your presentation, where, the spark that got you really engaged and fired up about this. And I think what we've all experienced this year is two other very important sparks, yes, with COVID and the death of George Floyd. So I think it's a moment to take hold of and make sure that things change. So thank you for that, Barbara.
Thank you.
I'd like to move on to our next speaker, who's Laureta Lake, who's brokerage manager for adult social care at East Sussex County Council. Laureta was a national TV journalist in Tirana prior to relocating to the UK in 2001. She has just over 13 years experience in adult social care and started in an assistant role in quality monitoring and now progressed to her current managerial role, which she's been doing for the past 7 years. She's also qualified as a bilingual advocate. So Laureta, thank you, and I'll switch over to you now.
Thank you very much, Mamta. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. I would say I'd share the views with the other guest speakers that there is quite a bit of work to be done, and my own professional journey in East Sussex has been an interesting one. But I would like to actually start from the beginning, when I had a little bit of a light bulb moment, I would say, when I applied for a job in one of the schools in Eastbourne initially to join as a teaching assistant. I thought I'd got to start somewhere, and I didn't get the job. Having said that, the feedback I found very, very helpful, because I got this phone call and I was told they were very impressed with my CV, but they've noticed that I didn't have a GCSE in English. And they were right, even though my English was more than a GCSE level, I'd like to say. I didn't have the qualification purely because my English courses were private courses. I did French at school, and I learned Italian and English privately. And that was the moment when I thought I need to start from scratch. So here I am, starting again at Sussex Downs College in evening classes in the last weeks of my pregnancy, I should say. Got the qualification and thought, yes, I'm ready to look at something else. There was no surprise to me that my very first job in UK, a professional job in UK, was with Vandu Language Services, which I'd still like to call Southeast Interpreting, because that's how I know it. And I really believe it was no coincidence that my professional journey started with an organization that has diversity at the core of its value. And I think I always felt grateful for that. And I think that was my stepping stone into a further professional development in UK. So a few years later, I felt the need that I needed to be in Eastbourne and progress further. So I applied for a job in East Sussex as a quality monitoring assistant, and I gave the role everything. And I remember very, very well feeling a little lost when I was going for the interview. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to focus on. I just knew that the paperwork, the job application, and everything looked very different from the private sector. I would say I was lucky, however, but my journey in East Sussex County Council has been very interesting. It has had the little up and downs in the beginning, but I would say that the local authority and the NHS and any other public services are a micro organism, as we say, of the wider community. So I would say depends who you meet. So my beginning, it wasn't really great. I did feel a little lost, even though I was doing the best I could. And I didn't feel really valued, but I really knew that that was to do with that particular line manager, if you like, rather than with the organization. So I decided to do better for myself and moved on. I mean, is little things. Like I was presented at the time with a certificate of achievement, and my line manager at the time said, and we now have Laureta from Romania, and I am just standing there thinking Romania is a beautiful country, but I come from Albania. And we need I felt the need that I had to educate people around me, but that was absolutely fine, because I also met a lot of people that were very happy to know more about my culture, about my background. I'm really happy to say that I have seen the difference within East Sussex County Council in terms of equality and diversity. 13 years ago, I remember thinking I'm the only person on the floor with an ethnic background, and now I can really see a diverse workforce on the floor. So that is great news. I also think East Sussex County Council has got the right policies and tools and to promote equality and diversity from the point of recruitment and promotion. Having said that, the policies and processes are as good as people that apply them. So I remember seeing a big difference between going from one line management to another, let's say. When I moved job within the local authority, my line manager at the time, Sophie, actually saw in me the future leader, if you like, within the organization before I was ready to see it in a way. And she probably didn't remember, doesn't remember at all, but I remember her saying that the team was approaching me with questions and advice, and they really respected my views on the day-to-day work, and she suggested that I attend training for moving into management. And then later on, I made a request to actually attend the Chartered Management Institute level 5, and it was granted. So I have seen the progress, but I also think I have been lucky to actually meet people within the organization that have seen the value on my work. I have interviewed a lot of people, and I have been interviewed a lot, and I am very conscientious of the fact that we need to recognize the values, and I think is very important that we have a diverse workforce, because I do believe that's how we do better. So I would say from my own experience, I would say if you look at a job advert and you think you can do it, then I would really strongly suggest that you go for it. I have seen so many people with degrees and a lot of skills that haven't been used in the minority groups. And I'd really like to see even more into public services. The one thing I always thought is there is this preparing for interview a training course that keeps popping up within our emails at work, and I always thought this would be great if people would have access to that before they actually get into the public services. Just those interview skills and preparing for for that, I think it would be great, because it will give a lot of clarity. If there was anything that I would say, and I would suggest people look at, is know your worth and don't be afraid to apply. Application and interviews in itself are a training, so you see what you expect, and always ask for feedback, because that feedback is what will make you get to the next step. When it comes to public sector job adverts, I would say focus on the making sure that you cover the essential criteria, because that's where we look for those skills and abilities. The last thing I would wanted to say is that it is very likely that I will be recruiting a new member of team in the new year, so watch out for the advert, and if you think you can do it, please apply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laureta. That was fascinating, and you really reminded me of my mother's advice to me when I started out, which was just keep putting one foot in front of the other and don't be afraid to fail. So I think you've just demonstrated that can get you somewhere in the end, although you've got to be quite thick-skinned, I think, is what we're learning from this. So now it's time for the essential part of our first hour of this webinar, which is the panel discussion. And I think Laureta already has started answering the first question that I was going to put to the panel as we wait for the audience to submit its questions, which is if you were advising someone from an ethnic minority today to go into your chosen career paths, what would you advise them to do? What would be your number one message to them today? So maybe, Laureta, do you want to just finish saying what I think you started saying at the end of your talk, and then we'll move on to Barbara and Sandra?
Yeah, I would say really know your skills and go for it. I will admit I came in this country thinking I need to learn very good English so I can be a better journalist, and maybe a master's in television media, and then it will be great. I'd like to think I compromised because I wanted a family. But in the back of my head, sometimes I do think, did I feel BBC was a reach? And never looked into that. So I would say if there is something in the back of your head, then give it a good try. And again, if the answer is no, at least you've got some feedback to go by and to decide what the next step is. But go for it and know your worth.
Okay, thank you so much, Laureta. Great advice. Barbara, would you like to respond to that question?
Yes, I think if I was talking to myself of 12, 13 years ago, it would be have the courage of your convictions, know your own worth and go for it. I was an admin assistant in a very junior role, but I felt that the organisation wasn't doing what it could do, and then I highlighted what I thought they should. And in doing so, I eventually ended up in that role. So it's have the confidence, don't take no for an answer, know your own worth.
Fantastic, thank you, Barbara. Sandra, I'm going to pass that on to you now.
Yeah, I would say I agree with mastering your skills. So do what you can to really understand what skills you have. Share stories of practical examples of action you have taken. So it's important to own the examples and talk about what you did. And then I think the third one is, I would say, practice how to communicate confidently. I remember, just listening, I remember writing out the story. I remember looking in the mirror, when I think about many things that I did in the past. Now I just look at it to put on makeup. But in those days, I remember, using it to practice before an interview, practice becoming fluent, talking about skills, examples, stories, and what role I played in that. I think the more you have it practiced, even if you feel nervous, it doesn't matter because you've got the story down, you've got and really emphasize what you did and own the actions that you've taken.
Fantastic. So some really rousing words there, and I would completely agree that we're terrible at marketing ourselves and we've got to get better at this. So thank you for that, Sandra. I'm going to take some questions that have been submitted from the audience, and one of those was the difference between working for a big organisation and working for an SME. The view is that often in SMEs you're subject to biases and ignorance that it's very difficult to escape if that person is the owner of the company. So would you have any advice for someone in organisations like that who are seeking to make a change?
Can I respond to that? I think that with the smaller organisation, and actually large or small, is really trying to build connection. And even if you think, oh, this organisation is really small, I don't think they like you, they hired you. So actually sometimes the behaviours are just going, some of it is unconscious. They're maybe not even aware of what your aspirations are or what you want. So always seek to try and make connection. And what employer doesn't want you to ask them, what does good look like? So you want to do your job as well as possible. Can I have a few minutes of your time? I just really want to ensure that I understand what you want me to deliver. What does good look like? And then you start to build that connection. Deliver, yes, because who wants to talk about progression if you
Absolutely.
don't
Great tip.
current job right?
Yeah,
so
exactly. And make it look like it was their idea in the first place, right?
Absolutely.
So Laureta and Barbara, any more tips that you would pass on that front? I don't know if you've had much experience of working in SMEs.
I haven't worked in a smaller organisation for over 20 odd years, but what I would say is, even though the NHS is a monolith of an organisation, you're still working in a small team, so the issues are probably they're very similar to that of a smaller company. So I suppose the benefit that you've got in a larger organisation is, if it's your line manager, there may be someone else that you can go and that you can speak to. There are people like myself or help support services or HR, but I recognise that if you're in a small team, it doesn't matter that there might be another 8,000 people. You're in that small team of 15 or 7 that you work with. So I would concur with everything that Sandra has said.
Thank you, Barbara. And Laureta, did you want to come in there?
Well, I wouldn't have a lot of experience with small organizations, and the only one I've got is with Vandu Language Services. And as I said, the whole workforce was diverse there, and it was a lot of values I took from there, to be honest. So, but what I would say is we need to educate the workforce. We need to educate the recruiters in looking at the real values of diverse workforce.
Thank you. And I think the person who asked that question is coming back with a clarification, which is also around, and it's worth pursuing this issue of SMEs because they are the biggest employer in this country. So what happens when they just skip over BAME applications, so applications from Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, just because they're not made in their own image, they're nervous? In your own experience, just because you didn't have GCSE English, they just didn't look at all the other qualifications you had to offer. So is there a way to, I mean, I don't know, Sandra, as well, through your work with BITC, is there a way to get people to be less afraid, less blinkered about this?
Interesting, we're having conversations with CIPD who are working on, and we had a conversation about working on advice that they can give to the smaller employer of how they could bring the commitments to the charter to life. So it's the support that a business needs, because often there's two things. I think first is the raising awareness of the benefits. So when I set out, this is good for business, good for understanding your customers and clients and reflecting that, and so sharing some of that evidence, and also giving them ideas, helping them with setting up a policy, the fact that it is important to have a policy and to communicate that. So some of it is really around getting the materials to them so they can quickly learn how to be a good employer as far as what good looks like. And then what we do with employers is convening those spaces so that they can quickly share from each other. So one of the things I do know is employers love to hear from other employees, other employers. So if we could get some SMEs who are actually doing well, then they can share with others, and that's
and to answer another question that's been posed, do you see evidence of change? Do you see that things are improving, that there is evidence of organisations who are getting better practice in place?
Oh, I absolutely. I mean, what we have seen is such a turbocharging towards the increase in employers signing the Race at Work Charter, but also we're encouraging the larger ones to help the ones in the supply chain, share the materials, let them join your training, let them join your good practice. So I think there's a cascade approach that many of the larger ones are using, as well as many of the smaller ones who want to work with some of these large organizations, realizing how to get their house in order. And also the talent pool is diverse, so they want to attract them. And not only that, but to keep them. And they know you have a good environment for people to want to stay with you.
Yeah, retention is another really important measure, isn't it? So Barbara and Laureta, did you want to come back on any of those points?
I just wanted to say something with regards to, I mean, these webinars in itself are a change in a step in the right direction. It will be very helpful if we could see funding going through for let's say, inviting smaller organizations and providing a little bit of training as to the values that they can get from a diverse workforce as well. So is targeting those smaller organizations.
Okay, thank you. And Barbara, did you want to come back on that point at all?
Yeah, I think what I would say is training is really important, and I think there is more that we as the NHS can do, as we're one of the larger employers. We've started doing it around disability, so it is certainly a conversation that we should start having as to how we can better utilise facilities that we might have in abundance. But I have seen changes to the way that race inclusion is demonstrated and evidenced within my organisation. Just a quick aside, I remember when I was still a PA and trying to get the organisation to look more favourably on race inclusion, and I asked the question of my then HR director, and this is many moons ago, as to how many BME people we had within our organisation then. And the response was, I don't know, but have a look at the surnames, that will give you an indication. Now, my surname is Harris. I don't think that would necessarily suggest to you that I would have been a person of colour. There is absolutely no way over the last 10 plus years that if I asked an HR director that question, that type of response would have been given. And now I'm able to tell you how many people roughly where they're situated. And now we know that we need to progress things so that people can move through a talent process into the higher bands. That is something that wouldn't have happened 10 to 15 years ago. It's taking a long time, but we are making improvements.
And
fantastic, thank you. Go
sorry,
on,
can I just add something very quickly? I think it was in one of the points that was made in the chats before. But one of the things I've undertaken personally is that when I interview, I make sure I've got two other colleagues in the panel. So while two should be enough technically, I want to have three there because I want to have a real conversation after the interview process to actually see where do we agree and how the three different points of view to actually reach that final appointment. And we have that diversity within that panel. So there are little things that people can do themselves in terms of when hiring, when recruiting, that they can address those elements.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions, but we also need to start winding up here. Just to bring this back to the theme of the event and the whole series of webinars really is linking your ability to get work and your prospects within those jobs to well-being and health And I just wondered if the panel would like to say anything just as final words on that issue of the difficulties of accessing healthcare, and the links between being able to have a choice in the jobs that you have, the hours that you work, the conditions you work in, and your well-being. So if I could give you each a final minute or so to say something on that point. Laureta, do you want to start? Or Barbara, you start, it's fine, I don't mind.
Sorry. I would say that within the NHS, there are so many differing professions that we can support people to work the hours that are suitable for them and their family situations, and also to ensure that they're doing the best that they can so that they are financially safe and stable. Also providing workforce health and wellbeing support should that be needed.
Thank you, Barbara. Laureta, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Barbara. The same thing goes within East Sussex County Council. There is a lot of support, and I think the key is to actually be able to get through that interview. And I know I've said this before, but is that the recruitment process, the criteria is quite different from smaller organizations, and a lot of people would miss out because they wouldn't know how to cover everything. And I didn't know, and I honestly didn't know how I actually got in the first place. But I think it's very important to actually provide some training to the wider community.
Okay.
To actually be able to gain those provisions.
Okay, thank you, Laureta. And Sandra, would you like to have a last word on the links between employment and access to healthcare and promoting well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to first say a huge thank you to Laureta and to Barbara for sharing their stories. I really found this inspirational. I think, you know, there's a huge challenge, and yes, it's not, many people have no choice. They're doing the jobs they do not have those choices because it's economically attached to their well-being and their life and their family's well-being. I think more needs to be done. You know, what are we looking at? We don't know what the impact, the echoes of what is going on, how that's going to impact people's lives. But I think everybody owes it to themselves to try and, you know, be mindful, to pace themselves, to try and find time and find somebody to talk to about issues. And also, if you can get a mentor, somebody who you can check in with, somebody who you can get advice from, I would say that's one of the best things that people could get, mentor or coach or somebody to support them.
I agree, yeah.
Thank you. That brings us back beautifully to the initial points that you all made about valuing yourself enough and believing that you're worth it and making, you know, digging in your heels and making an effort to get to where you want to get to. So thank you all to my brilliant panel. It's been really inspirational to hear you all speak. And we'll move on to the next session. So thank you again. Okay. In the second half of this webinar, what we would like to do is to move on from talking about the problems that we've been hearing about, the experiences and the barriers, to starting to look at more deeply at what can we do about these, what are the solutions out there. And to start that session, we have a fantastic speaker in Josh Babarinde, who's, I should say now, has to leave quite soon after his presentation. So if you have any questions for him, please do start posting them into the chat as he's going. So Josh Babarinde is founder and CEO of smartphone repair company Cracked, which employs at-risk young people to harness their entrepreneurial spirit and give them a way out of criminal activities. In 2018, Cracked was named as Social Enterprise of the Year by the Centre for Social Justice. He calls himself a proud Eastbournian and was awarded an OBE in 2020 in recognition of this social enterprise work. So Josh, over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you DRI for hosting this webinar. It's much needed at a time like now. In fact, I'm not sure we've ever needed a webinar more than this at a time like now. So it's great to be able to join you, and good evening to all of you who are here tonight. So as Mamta said, my name's Josh, and I run Cracked It as a social enterprise, and I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so sharing the story of it with you, in so much as it represents a solution to a challenge of youth unemployment, particularly youth who are of colour. But also to kind of showcase the very discipline and field of social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship more generally as another solution to employment challenges. And I'm going to share my screen so that I can animate some of my remarks visually. So Mamta, I wonder if you could just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Excellent stuff, thank you. So here we go. Cracked It, as Mamta said, is social enterprise smartphone repair service staffed by young ex-offenders and young people at risk of offending. We were founded back in 2015. We've had a wonderful 5 years, and we'll be coming to a close at the beginning of next year as we launch a legacy plan to plant the seeds of our work into other organisations in the future. And something that's been really important to me in my journey as a social entrepreneur is this idea of flying over the grass that comes from this quote that you can see here. The idea that you may have some kind of objective to cross the grass. There may be a barrier, a sign that says you can't walk on the grass, but you don't have to stop there. You can still cross it. And flying over that grass is one such way. Innovating, thinking outside the box and trying something novel. So I'm going to put my money where my mouth is in my presentation style this evening and present by flying over the grass via a pecha kucha. It's a Japanese term that literally means chit-chat, but in practice, it's a series of 20 slides, images, that each move automatically after 30 seconds. So it means I will be bang on 10 minutes. Hopefully I'll have some momentum and hopefully I won't get timed out. So wish me luck. Now, the story of Cracked It started with my concern for the issue of youth violence, particularly in London, where I was living a few years ago. And what was clear is that the levels of youth violence in London were increasing. We got to a point where they were greater than they were in New York City. And 85% of violent crime in London is committed by people aged 30 or under. And they're also 4 times more likely to be victims of violent crime themselves. Now, I went to go work as a youth worker in East London and worked with young people who were just like anybody else. They were involved in this kind of negative stuff, but they wanted to earn money, feel valued, and belong. And a lot of people try to get that through employment legitimately, but these guys didn't feel as though they had those opportunities. People would tell me about how they would deal drugs or steal bikes and use the cash they made to secretly slip into their mum's handbag week after week to help pay the bills. And a real challenge is that 1 in 5 young people aged 16 to 24 at the time that I launched Cracked It, and the numbers aren't dissimilar now, are out of education, employment or training. And this is only getting worse with the coronavirus crisis and the economic fallout. And this is a problem because we know that employment is the single biggest factor that can reduce someone's propensity to offend or to re-offend. So I tasked myself with thinking about what we can do about it. And the reason that I tasked myself with that challenge is because we might have typically relied on government funding to be able to do that. But government funding has been cut over the years for these kind of interventions. And there is a need to think outside of the box at what other finance we can harness in order to invest into the social impact space, to invest in these young people. And social enterprise is one such way, which is the practice of harnessing a commercial market and using the cash to support impact. So I was thinking, well, what market could we harness? And phone repair seemed to be an interesting one. 29% of people have a smashed smartphone screen. The average person swipes, scrolls, or taps on their device 2,617 times a day. But what's more is that 3/4 of people, according to Motorola, don't repair their phone within 6 months or at all because the existing options are too inconvenient. Well, Cracked It comes in at the intersection of that consumer issue around phone repair and the social impact issue, the issue of youth violence and increasing youth unemployment, particularly affecting young people of colour. And that's why we became London's smartphone repair service, staffed by these very young people to support them away from crime and towards employment. Now, how has Cracked It worked? Well, what we did is we didn't set up another phone repair shop on the street corner that people find too inconvenient to access. Instead, we would train up young people working with local authorities and housing associations in the skill of phone repair, and then employed them to staff pop-up repair shops that we were held in large workplaces in London. And right here, you can see one of our young people, Jake, of Lebanese heritage, in the US Embassy, repairing phones for members of staff and diplomats even there. And we would take our repairs to all different types of organizations, including big banks. You can see Barclays there, big consultancies like Deloitte, the Ministry of Justice, River Island. The list goes on, circling around them and providing opportunities for our young people. Often the first time that someone with convictions along the lines of the ones that our young people have been let onto those premises. Imagine Trump's embassy letting someone with a conviction for carrying an axe to come on to their premises and help change their lives. Now, the way our business model worked is obvious, as you might imagine. We'd generate income through selling repairs direct to consumers, but also to businesses as well. And we generate revenue through selling some of our training services to local authorities. And the impact model behind Cracked It is one of the intermediate labour market. Now, this involves the creation of a temporary job in a genuine workplace, which serves as a safe space for our young people to learn about the norms and customs of employment and develop key employability skills. So that by the end of their time with us, up to a year, they were in a position where they were ready more than ever to transition into employment in the wider economy. And that's exactly one of the things that we've been able to achieve. Our young people who have histories of not being in work at all ended up in a place where 2/3 of them within a year of graduating from our programme were in education, employment or training. And more than that, 8 in 10 of them did not reoffend within that same period. And to give you a bit of context, more than half of young people after they're released from prison do go on to reoffend. And we know that disproportionately it's people of colour who are young people in prison. And this has enabled us to, this impact has given us the profile to win some great awards or feature in the press and platforms to be able to go onto television, for example, and challenge politicians on the policies and funding around young people, around employment and employability. And as a Liberal Democrat, I'm the diversity officer for the Liberal Democrats. That was really important to me. But the most important things to me are stories of people like Tariq, of Middle Eastern heritage. And Tariq has given us permission for me to share a bit of his story. He was in a young offenders institution, and as a result of taking part in our program and developing the skills, he was able to take the steps that he needed towards employability. And he's setting up an amazing home life. He's going to be a dad, which is awesome. But another really cool legacy of what we've been able to do during the coronavirus was refurbishing old devices that we sourced from our corporate partners and donated them to care homes in my hometown of Eastbourne during that first lockdown, so that people who were in those homes unable to connect with friends and family were able to do so through the video phones that we donated, that our young people had a hand in refurbishing. And in terms of our legacy, beyond that closure date, because funding's difficult, business model's really difficult in the context of coronavirus, the legacy that we're planting is within organizations like Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, the world's largest gang intervention organization. We're sharing our model with them so that they can apply Cracked It and our values in their setting. And we're doing the same with many other organizations in the UK and across the world. But the most important thing as part of that journey is to continue flying over the grass and looking for novel solutions to support vulnerable young people of colour away from crime and towards fulfilling futures by employment. Now that brings my flying over the grass during this session to a close. My 20 slides that have each moved automatically after 30 seconds conclude on this one, slide number 20. My name is up there, and also my Twitter handle, should you wish to connect with me and find out more beyond this webinar about some of Cracked It's work, or indeed some of the other impact projects that I'm involved with beyond. So I'm delighted now to I'll stop that presentation and happy to take any questions that people might have, questions about the way that Cracked It works, or indeed questions about entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship as a solution itself to the unemployment challenge, particularly within the BAME community.
Well, thank you, Josh. I think, you know, it's rarely that presentations make you laugh and cry at the same time, isn't it? So thank you so much for that. And it's a real lesson in, you know, if it doesn't exist, you have to invent it. You just have to find a way to make things work in the way that you'd like them to work. So thank you for that. I can see you've inspired many in our audience tonight.
I'll check out the chat now as
well.
Yeah,
check out the chat. There's some comments for you and some questions. One that came in quite early on is this idea of, and I'm sure you will have experienced this with a lot of your young workers, is that their need to align with and access healthcare. And is there anything that you would advise in terms of, you know, for the NHS, for social care organisations, in how they can be more accessible to these young people?
Yeah, that is such a good question. So many of the young people that we work with have, you know, additional support needs, and the two most common ones were, well, the most common one was housing, and a lack of secure housing meant that they struggled to engage with some of our programs. But the second most common one were challenges around mental health, and many of the young people that we work with, for example, smoked a lot of cannabis. And stemming from smoking cannabis can come issues around psychosis, for example, and hallucinations and things like that that come with having psychosis. And this was really destructive for many of them. Many of them would speak about hearing voices telling them to do certain things that were really negative. And among the people that we worked with at Cracked It, there's a real reluctance to access mental health services. So there's a particular part of East London we're working in where there's a big Bangladeshi community, and there's a real stigma around access to mental health. I used to intern and be a trustee, actually, of the African Health Policy network, and some of the research that we did as well reflected a very similar thing in the Black community, that there are, you know, some really intense cultural stigmas around, you know, having a mental health challenge, which led, and certainly in our young people's case, many of them to kind of try to deny to themselves fundamentally that that anything was up, and thus denied themselves the opportunity to access the services that they needed, the early intervention services that they needed, to be able to get on top of some of the mental health challenges that they were having. So yes, they existed a lot and still do in large part. Now, what were some of the solutions? Well, I think one of the most critical things when you're working with people who are have multiple layers of vulnerability, is to try to identify what I would describe as a credible messenger, to help pass on really important messages around services that they really ought to be accessing, that would really help them to access. Now, what I recognized, certainly in my earlier days, when I was just a bit naive and thinking I could just give people a leaflet and they will go and walk in to see their doctor, what I realized is that actually pretty early on, something we needed to do is find that credible messenger in that young person's life. So is it a youth worker that they might already be working with, a youth worker who they trust, a youth worker who they know is clear on what that young person's interests are? Is it a family member? Is it a friend? Is it a teacher? Is it local shopkeeper? Is it somebody else? What is critical is that we identify those credible messengers and equip them with the knowledge to impart relevant information. A really important, actually, credible messenger for young men, the kind of young men that we work with at Cracked It, are barbers in the barber shop, and the people who work on the counters in the local fried chicken shop, for example. They're people who they listen to, but they're maybe in some senses not the usual suspects of people we might go to impart information. And I think we need to fly over the grass in how we might equip them with the tools that they need to be those credible messengers, to support young people, particularly those who might be experiencing mental ill health.
So that's brilliant. Another example of flying over the grass. I love the idea of credible messengers, and it ties in with a question we had earlier about you put up a slide showing the list of organisations that your young people had been able to work in on their premises. What kind of barriers did you meet, and how did you overcome those? There must have been barriers of trust that you faced there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a case of hustling, if you like, to start overcoming those barriers. I'll tell you a bit of a story. The first time I approached a big corporate and said, hey, what do you think of the idea about me bringing some young people who have criminal convictions onto your premises and fixing your staff's phones? The response wasn't a very positive one in the first instance, and I understood why. There were barriers that needed to be broken, and that kind of thing. But what I did is I was at an event where the CEO of a very large financial institution was speaking, and in his remarks he spoke about corporate social responsibility and wanting to do good. And so I thought, okay, here's an opportunity. So I stood up and I asked him a question. I said, look, you've talked about corporate social responsibility and supporting society. Well, a very quick win for you would be inviting us in to come and deliver our repair services, our young people to deliver our repair services to your staff. And he couldn't say no. He was in a room full of his peers. He would be a hypocrite otherwise. So those conversations started progressing. Then I spoke to another competitor financial institution. And I said, oh, by the way, I just spoke to the CEO of this organization, and we're going to be running our clinics in there. Now, it wasn't 100% certain at that point. I won't call it a little white lie, but it wasn't far off it, to be honest. And then that organization said, well, if those guys are doing it, then we're going to do it, but we're going to do it quicker. So then I went back to the original one and said, oh yeah, I spoke to these guys, and actually they're moving really fast. And things have been taking a little while here. So, and they said, well, if they're moving fast, then we'll be even faster. And in the end, they both came through as partners, wanting to outdo one another. And then once we had those two established as our, some of our core initial partners to go in and fix phones, it was then much easier to be able to go to various others and say, well, look, these guys let us in, so there's no reason why you can't. And the US Embassy is actually a really great example of, you know, when some organisations would say, "Oh, we're not sure whether this is appropriate to allow your young people in for this purpose," or "We're not sure about security," or "There's some IT stuff that we need to cover," or "health and safety," whatever. Well, as soon as we say, "Well, the US Embassy lets us in," and you know, there is probably no organisation in the UK, or very few organisations in the UK, that have more stringent security measures than them, it becomes much easier. But I guess something else as well that's really important to kind of help bridge that divide, or that perceived divide, is, you know, it's we equip our young people with a skill that people genuinely need. Now, when we promote our services to, you know, employees in Deutsche Bank or UBS or Barclays, our pitch isn't "come and spend some money with young offenders," because they're more than that. And you know, young offenders isn't their identity. Their identity in this context is as really highly skilled repair technicians, with whom you can receive actually the most convenient repair services that's available on the market. You don't even have to leave your building, some cases not even your desk, to access the service. And so people queue within their buildings, or pre-coronavirus, they would queue within their buildings to access a repair from our young people. Many of our customers wouldn't even know that our young people were people who had offended before. And we do a kind of survey of all of our customers to ask why they use our service. 57% of customers use Cracked It on the basis that we're the most convenient option available to them. The next most common thing was price, and then the third thing is, which is about 25%, is because of, or 20%, is because of the social impact. So a way of bridging that gap is by making sure that people recognise the genuine value of an individual beyond their past, if it's, you know, been a colourful one, and yeah, help people to realise a great contribution they can make to people's lives, enabling those clumsy or unlucky 29% of people to be able to swipe, scroll, or tap on their device the 2,617 times that they want to.
That's brilliant, Josh. You remind me of my brother. You call it hustling, but I call it just recognizing that opportunity and really giving people what they want, which gets you what you want as well. So that's fantastic. Thank you for those tips. I think we're getting from all our speakers tonight some really diamond tips to take away. So I'll let you go now, Josh. I know you have to go, and we'll carry on with the discussion, but please do stay in touch. And if you just monitor the chat and get back to anyone privately if they had any specific questions, that would be great.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, so thank you again for having me. It's really been a delight, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. So we will move on to our next speaker, who's Mark Patrick. Mark is a freelance recruitment and life coach for organisations and a recruitment assessor in leadership and management. He's worked in management for 25 years in the private sector, has been a mentor, trainer, coach in many culturally diverse areas in London, the Southwest and Wales. He's won 3 annual excellence awards from the international recruitment agency, the Impelum Group. So Mark, I'll hand over to you.
Good evening, everyone. So first of all, thank you to DRI for having me here today, or tonight. And thank you to the speakers that came before me. You stole a bit of my thunder, actually, when you talked about recruitment. But I was absolutely fascinated to hear those stories. And my take on this is this. My journey started in 1985. I'm not going to give away my age, but I probably have a little bit. But what I've learned from that is I sat down with my dad, and he said to me over the dinner table, and he said to me, son, it's time to journey into the unknown, i.e., you're going to start your life. And I remember thinking to myself, what's he telling me? I soon found out when I was launched into orbit with a £200 burning a hole in my back pocket and a one-way ticket to London. He had sent me to London where I was born. I was living in Jamaica at the time. But as he drove me to the airport, he gave me some really sound advice. Like I said, I was a teenager at the time. I remember thinking, I better listen to this because not often does he get this serious or even sentimental in the car as we drove to the airport. He said, number one, son, don't let the color of your skin stop you from advancing in your life. Number two, I don't care what you do in your life, son, whether you sweep the streets, whether you're a waiter, whatever it is to do, picking up rubbish from the street, whatever, be the best you can be. And number three, he always said to me, son, be authentic in whatever it is you do. And I've always followed that premise he gave me, that sense of purpose. And as I was in the airplane flying away from Jamaica and waving goodbye to this lovely country that I'd fallen in love with since the age of 10, I began to reflect on those that had come before me and my dad. I was going to England when my grandmother had come to this country in 1958, my dad's mum. My mum's mum had come just after the Second World War. Both my nan and my grandmother, called them different names. My nan came here to work as a nurse just after the war. My dad's mum came here and started working laundrette, but she sacrificed everything for us to follow. Every one of us on this call is an echo of people that have come before us. I've taken that mindset into my career since the age of 18. How can I let my family down? They gave me, at that very moment I woke up, they had given me the values and the expectation that I should expect of myself. I knew it would be tough, but I could still hear my dad in my background. I had a choice when I first started. 18, £200 in my pocket for books and all the rest of it. What did I go and do? I bought myself a Commodore 64, £199. Left myself with 1 pence, stupid. And I knew my uncle wasn't going to put up with me sitting there in the house eating all the food. So I had a choice. I had to find some work. I did 3 choices. I got 3 jobs. First lessons I learned about recruitment. Number 1, it works in the power of 3. Give yourself the options. Also, there are different ways to get a job. Sometimes it's who you know, which I didn't believe at first, but quite quickly I learned. Number 2, it is the jobs you go for. You can target them, or sometimes it's quite plain lucky. So I had a choice: WH Smith's, McDonald's, or Tesco's. Great choices. I chose McDonald's, mainly because they were the first to reply. There was no science behind it. But as I learned later on, there's clearly a big science behind choosing the right job that gives you the right promotion prospects, develops your skills so you can move on further. And what I've come to the conclusion after all these years is this: there is one key skill that threads it all together. Everyone today has talked about it without necessarily talking about the one word. It is a skill that I would definitely want to talk about now in the next 5 minutes, because this time will fly by. Josh mentioned a messenger. I can't remember the first thing he said, but he said something about a messenger. He's absolutely right.
Credible messenger.
Credible messenger. I don't want anyone to forget that, because it's exactly what I'm about to say myself. The one key skill to have, as I've learned, as I've watched my own career go up, down, but mostly up, thank God, as I've transitioned from being a McDonald's manager, running through their system, transitioning into recruitment in London. As one of the few, I think, of the 2,500 employees in 1998 in recruitment in my company, a great company, by the way, I was one of only 3 black managers, and it stayed that number all the way until I left in 2011. I thought, well, that's not right. But secondly, why am I here? Why have I made it? Why have I not only done it in London, I've asked for a transfer and transferred to Wales. That's not my culture. But I did it. And not only that I did it, I made sure it continues to this day. So what's that one word? What's that word? What's that word? It's influence. We've got to be able to influence people. We've got to be able to encourage change. How can you change things unless you accelerate it? We have to accelerate change. 2020, a year of great change. There was a time when corporate companies wouldn't even let you work from home. And now it's the norm. Things have changed. Things will continue to change. It's not just the young that make things change. It's any age change could change. Any age at all. So I go back to that word influence. How does that help you get a job? Well, think about it. If you're sending a CV, you're ultimately influencing the person at the end to take your CV. So you need to invest in your skill, your influencing skill, as well as your ability to put a CV together, to put a cover letter together, to put it in the right order. Same as when you're going for promotion. Now, sometimes nepotism takes over, we know that. But ultimately, you want to make sure that you have projected yourself enough so you do get chosen, no matter what the odds. So we must influence. Memorable messenger, is that right? Yeah, I think that's right. So I like that, I love that, and everything that came before from the others. So I come to how do you now influence people? Well, I put it into 4 key categories. And here's the first one. I'll say them as quick as I can, forgive me, but I have got one eye on the clock. Assertiveness. That's the one, what's one of the ingredients of influencing. Be assertive. If you want something, go for it. But you have to have a certain amount of self-belief to get there. There's an old saying that says, show me the boy of 7 and I will show you the man. What does that mean? It means we are brought up with limiting beliefs. We are brought up with the beliefs of our parents, our guardians, authority figures, teachers. You know that little voice that says, I can't do it. I can't send that CV, I'm too young. Or that job's too big for me. I can't get promoted because it's all fixed. That is the voice of an authority figure from your youth. We have to learn to turn that down. It's like me coming on tonight. 2 nights ago, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to say? Oh, you're going to mess it up. You're going to twist your words up, Mark. You're going to have dry mouth, which I probably do. Right? But you have to turn that voice down. That's one of the key parts of influencing people. How do you do that? Well, you do that from repetition. You do that from practice, repetition. Whether it's sending your CV out or trying to find the competencies that you need to get promoted, find it. And the story I'm going to quickly tell is I had 3 people in 2005 join me. One Italian from Cardiff, one Cardiff Italian girl, one Cardiff girl, born and bred, and one Asian guy, or an Asian man, I should say. All of these 3 came in with something special. One came in, just no CV, just announced to me that they would like a job. But not just a job, she came with a CV, she wanted a recruitment job, very specific. And it was Christmas, I remember it being near to Christmas, and I remember thinking, what's she doing coming on a Friday night just before Christmas, asking for a job? Is she mad? But she had the audacity, the assertiveness to come in and plant herself in front of me. Within a few months, she got the job. 9 years later, she became a manager herself. That took a bit of time, but she got there. The other 2, the same story. Whether they sent me a cover letter or came in for an interview, they've all had the audacity to do their research, find out who I was, speak to me, get an interview, and get their job. That's it, assertiveness. The other one is the ability to communicate and to reason. 7% of communication is what you say. 38% is how you say it. 55%, if I've got my maths right, is your body language. So if you are going to sit down in front of some people at work, if you are going to go on an interview, you've got to make sure your body language is right. Your posture, your proximity, your gestures, your eye contact, your handshake, whether a man or woman, they're different, you know. I haven't got the time to talk about that today. You also have to have your interpersonal skills and your interaction skills. These are 3 and 4. I talked about assertiveness. I've talked about communication briefly. Now I'm just going to run on to interpersonal skills. There was a young black man, story I know, young black man in the 1970s, picture it, big afro, platform shoes, flares, working in a business, a marketing firm. And he was desperate to get into not desperate, he wanted to move forward. One of the key qualities he had was his ability to empathize with people, his ability to ask for favors and also do favors for people, his ability to be a team member, all part of his interpersonal skills, something that we must continue to develop. And one day his boss pulled him aside. His boss said to him, young man, I want to take you on a client visit. This client is a #1 target client, and I want you to come. The young black man was like, oh my God, this is the 1970s, not the 2000s, not now, 1970s, 40 years ago. And he said, all right, I'll come. He's nervous now, of course, because now he's been put to the test. He goes to the client visit with his boss. And just before he walks in the door, the boss says to him, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to lead this meeting. And I'm going to give you £20, because not only are you going to lead the meeting, you're going to pay for the lunch, because it was a lunch as well. The young black man said, oh my God, this is opportunity. Into the meeting they went. And of course, the boss, the client was expecting the boss to lead. Boss said, no, this young man's leading. The young man proceeded to take over and display his skills, because now he had the opportunity. And at the end of the lunch, the client was eating out of his hand. And not only that, the young man got up and paid for the lunch. He came out and the boss said to him, well done, you've just been promoted. The young black man could not believe it. He'd been given his opportunity and he'd taken it, but he needed someone to spot him. Everybody has talent. Everybody has talent. But it takes a talent to spot talent. You have to be brave enough to break out of your comfort zone wherever you sit, whether you're 18 or 55. Look around you. There's talent everywhere. Tap into it. Be that messenger. Be that person who has influenced someone, who has shaped someone. I was given a chance. That young person, by the way, is my father. The same man who gave me the advice when I was 18. He just didn't tell me until last year, would you believe? So I thought, Dad, why didn't you tell me that before? Saved me a lot of trouble. But he just said, you've got to learn for yourself. And I learned the hard way, working through a lot of rubbish sometimes, but I got there in the end. Which brings me down to your ability to interact with people. That's key with influencing people. You've got to avoid conflict and manage conflict, sometimes collaborate, sometimes cooperate where you don't want to, compromise where you don't want to, and sometimes be very forceful about what you want to do. This gets you noticed. I'm not saying you must fight. So those are the 4 key areas of influencing for me that will influence your CV. And if you don't believe me, think about it. If you're going on a date, this is a good example, but if you're going on a date, right, and you want to influence your date, don't you? See, you slap on the old Brute, Old Spice, and off you go. For your date with nice clothes, shirt, polished shoes, or if a lady, I'd imagine a handbag, a makeup, lipstick, all the rest of it. Because you want to influence that other person to at least get another date or that you're a safe person to be around. It's the same when it comes to opportunities at work. We must spot the talent that is out there. Share the knowledge that we have. We can learn a lot from younger people too. I'm talking about my particular generation. Since leaving the corporate world 6 years ago, I've worked with apprentices within recruitment. I've worked with team leaders within recruitment, passing on my knowledge, because it's something I always wanted to do. One of my earlier managers said, pass it on, Mark, pass it on. So for me, you can look at all the tools of recruitment if we want. That will take so much more time, and I'm quite happy to do that in the future. But remember, influence is key. Yeah, change takes time. It needs someone to twist it a bit quicker. Because remember, there's a lot of people who are in denial that things need to change. So please act as an agent of change. And I'll end it with this, really. We could talk about influencers. I don't want to mix it up with the social media influencers that are around today. I don't know much about them, to tell you the truth. But one thing I will say, be yourself. You can't be a copy of anyone else. Copy little bits, but you are your own unique person. Sell yourself in the right way, but most of all, be authentic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think you were like that voice in my head for most of it, until you mentioned Brute aftershave. You lost me there. So let's move on to our panel discussion. Mark, there were some specific questions for you, but I'll bring them into the panel discussion to make sure that Nikki and Ruqia get their chance to speak as well. So I'd like to introduce, we're going to move into a panel format now and introduce two more women. Nicola Gage is the Head of Hospitals, CHC and ASC Financial Services for East Sussex County Council. She's a qualified social worker. She's worked in adult social care for 24 years. She's worked at East Sussex for 6 years and through her role has been able to demonstrate a strong commitment to issues of equality for staff and also for the vulnerable adults that she works with. And alongside Nikki, we've also got DRI's very own race equality and community development worker, Ruqia Osman, who's just joined us. She's a scientist by training and has held positions as a governor of the University of Bath and trustee of the Student Union at Bath University in her formal role as the education officer. As well as this, Ruqia was involved in leading and working with many underrepresented student groups. She has taken part in many campaigns to promote equality and opportunity for young people. So welcome my panel for this second session. I'm going to start you off with a couple of questions and then as specific questions come in, I'll direct them to you. So if I start with you, Nikki, what are some of the biggest obstacles that you're aware of for progression into good jobs and making progress from that? And what can professionals and organisations do to address those obstacles? Do you have examples of good practice in mind?
Yeah. So, I mean, firstly, thank you for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So, for me, I think the biggest obstacle for me, I mean, I've had experiences of sort of being overlooked for opportunities. I think that a lot of the panel members have talked about some of the obstacles in terms of progression. And the biggest obstacle for me has been around kind of, it's up here really, it's your confidence and having that confidence to reach for opportunities that are out there and just having that confidence. So professionally, the way that I've sort of managed it and what I would kind of recommend to other professionals is to really focus on gaining that experience. I used to have a 3-year rule, which I still do, which is, you know, to look to do something different sort of every sort of 3 years, or to look for opportunities within your organisation sort of every 3 to 5 years. And sideways moves are okay, because it's all about what's going to help with that confidence is kind of having that real, you know, overall experience within the organisation. I also took lots of opportunities and recommend that you also take opportunities for training to develop your skills and to develop a really good knowledge base. I left school with 2 GCSEs, and in my 24 years working for local authority, I have done 3 NVQs. I've done my social work degree, and I've done my practice education training. So local authorities offer a lot of opportunities for personal development. So that, you know, my advice is to really, as Mark was just saying, you just have to overcome that kind of voice in your head, that sort of that voice of doubt, and really be confident and really reach for those opportunities as they become available, as you see them. Sometimes you may have to look outside of your opportunities. I think as you progress, the opportunities for those really kind of high level jobs, they become less and less because they're fewer. So sometimes you do have to look a bit further afield to find those opportunities. In terms of what East Sussex are offering in terms of kind of opportunities to address some of the barriers, we offer good mentoring, coaching for staff. I know that I've had coaching myself before I progressed into a senior role. I think that there's there are good opportunities for training within East Sussex, and opportunities, as I've said, to become professionally qualified if that's what you want. But if you are already professionally qualified, they offer opportunities for best interest assessor training, AMP training. I'm thinking specifically adult social care here. And then they offer within adult social care competency frameworks at every level of the organisation. There are also initiatives that are already working. We offer apprenticeships at every level of the organisation and opportunities for that. If you're interested in becoming a social worker, if you wanted to fund that yourself through the Open University, East Sussex offer you the opportunity to, they offer you placements and they will support that. We've also started doing the apprenticeship. And, you know, we've had a number of staff that we've put through social work training that have become qualified. Yeah, so, I mean, that's just some of the things that we're doing within East Sussex.
Well, that sounds great, Nikki, because it's the difference, I'm thinking, to what Mark was just talking about as well, is that in the health service and in social care, there's so much structure to that progression through the ranks, and getting the qualifications can help you to move up the ladder in a very systematic way, which just, it's much more of a free fall. In the private sector, I think you'd agree, Mark, as well. It's quite good to make that contrast, really, and it's great to see some of those practices in the public sector that could definitely be learned from, I think. So Ruqia, if I come to you as someone who's, you know, talked a lot to your fellow students about finding jobs, keeping jobs, and I know you've shared stories with us privately about these, but what do you see as the major obstacles for people your age and those leaving school, even, you know, if they're not going to college, or people leaving college?
I think there's several different obstacles. The first major obstacle is the attainment gap, which highlights that students from BAME backgrounds, especially Black students, are more likely to underperform compared to their peers. And this is not just something that's present at university level, it's something that's picked up on in schools as well. And I think there's a clear link between achievement in schools, access to education, and there's a clear link to that, and access to employment. So I think that's a major barrier. And the graduate outcome survey by Advanced HE actually highlighted that graduates from BAME background are less likely to be in full-time employment after graduating. They're more likely to be in insecure contracts, and are more likely to be in lower skilled jobs, which highlights the fact that there's a bigger issue here. So I think, you know, even from those who have gone through the process of university, the playing field is still not equal when they come out of that process. And I think this is wider than just academics. I think it's a whole student experience issue, because often there's a lot of reports of racism and incidences of racism that aren't dealt with appropriately. And sometimes these incidences come from teachers, lecturers, personal tutors. And I just don't think educational institutions, or sometimes even workplaces, are set up to deal with these sort of incidences in an appropriate manner.
Well, that's brilliant, Ruqia. I mean, it really does show that it's so hard when you're starting out at that age and you're lacking that confidence, self-belief that Mark was talking about, and, you know, potentially your own institution who should have been setting you up for that career path may have been part of the problem. So that's really interesting to delve into a bit more when we can. Is there anything that you've seen in your experience or your friends' experience, or those you've advocated for, that look like good practice? You know, that you looked at it and thought, that's a good solution, that works for us?
I think one good example would be mentoring and schemes that are specifically aimed at BAME students or BAME graduates, because a lot of the things that have come from that is the fact that, you know, the lack of representation does hugely impact the way that people feel about themselves and the way that they see themselves reflected in, for example, different career fields. Because if you see a senior team or a leadership team that doesn't have that representation on it, you're going to think that, you know, that's something that's potentially not for me, that's something, a career that I don't see for myself. So definitely I've seen mentoring work really well, and even organizations like Recruitment that offer specific training targeted towards being individuals, because it's all about equity. It's about making sure that these individuals have the same level of skills and training in order to feel prepared and ready to go into the workplace. I think schemes like that have been working really, really well.
Well, that's great. That's a great positive note. And I think it does, what you've pulled out there is the huge importance of having role models that, you know, you can relate to, really. And I think that's something that we've all struggled with finding. And I think what's wonderful about this session tonight and some of the others webinars we've had is just seeing these role models coming through and saying to everyone else, you can do this too, we've done it. So I think we're in a really fantastic moment right now. So if I can just ask all the panel, and Mark, if you want to come in here as well. One of the questions we had earlier in the chat, which I've lost now, but it was around, and I think it's a fair question to put for balance in this debate, is to what extent do we let our own skin color hold us back? You know, we look at ourselves and think, oh no, that's going to be a problem. You know, you're nervous before you even start. So I just wondered if any of you wanted to comment on that. You know, are we stopping ourselves sometimes from really going for something? Mark, do you want to get, you're on mute, Mark.
That would help, wouldn't it? Take it off mute. From my own personal experience, I think I was using my example earlier, was my dad did drill into me that time when I was younger, when I was coming back to England, you know, not to let that affect me. But the reality is it did. I think it does take a toll eventually, because you feel that when you're going for promotion, maybe the people will discriminate. I had certainly a couple of instances where I went for a more senior position and I felt under great stress to overperform more than everyone else. I had high expectations of myself, but I also thought the color of my skin would actually prevent me. On the one instance, I thought I had justification that that was the case, but then I disproved that a few days later when I did get a bigger role, and I was the only person of color, and I actually got it. So for me, yes, I think it does affect you. It affected me for a while, even though I had some great self-belief that I could get a job beyond what the norm of my friends were having. But it took a great strain. It's a great strain.
So it is that getting past that first hurdle, isn't it? So,
yeah.
Nikki, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I started by saying a big barrier for me has been sort of just having that kind of lack of confidence and that voice of doubt. You know, when I first decided that I wanted to be a head of service in 2014, I submitted about sort of 20 applications, have been to about 8 interviews. And, you know, it does make you it does knock your confidence every time you get a knockback. But I think my message to everyone is that just keep going for it, keep trying, learn from those interviews, learn from those experiences, seek feedback. And, you know, you will do it. You can achieve your goals and your dreams.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki.
I'd have to agree with that in just a second. That again, when I went for that first experience was in 2005. I was up for a big promotion. I was told, Mark, don't go for it because it's rigged. And I'm thinking, well, I'll go for it. But I kept thinking, what do they mean it's rigged? Is it because, you know, I is, you know, black? Or what is it? What's a quote, a famous phrase? What is it? But actually, when I look back at it on reflection, maybe I just didn't want the job enough. Maybe I was just trying to prove that, you know, I can get it, but did I actually want the job? And maybe they picked up on that. Years later, when another opportunity came again, and I was an external candidate up against 9 internal candidates, got through 5 interviews, and I really wanted the job, I got it. So I would advise, like Nikki said, persevere, learn from each experience. Pull up, because they will always give you feedback. I think somebody said that earlier as well. Seek the feedback as long as it's constructive. Work on it, and pull on your mentors. You know, if your mentor doesn't pull you out, do what I do, go and pull them towards you. You know, and, you know, then you'll get even more perspective. because it is about that. And that's what builds up your self-confidence to, you know what, to go for another role. Me, after I got to that stage, 2014, I quit corporate life altogether because I thought I've learned enough from that. Let me go and do it for myself, or let me give back something, because I felt I gained as much perspective, but now I had to gain another perspective from the young people coming up, learn something new from them, but also pass something back to them as a mentor, as a coach, and as an apprentice assessor as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. And I'm just going to come to Ruqia, but I've just been asked to remind you all to complete the survey that is being posted in the chat, which will be really helpful to us. So thank you for that. Ruqia, so, you know, you're hearing from a lot of people who are, well, you know, how do I say that politely, been around for a while, made it in their career paths, and they're offering, you know, a lot of insights on what it takes to get there, you know, ranging from assertiveness to humility to thick skin, whatever. So do you think, from your perspective and you know, your wider experience as well, that do you think people, when they're applying for jobs, are very conscious of their own skin color, and do you think that is a barrier in itself?
I think there's two ways of thinking about it, because the students and like the graduates that I've worked with, I see them applying to job after job and being rejected for reasons including like, oh, we don't think you're going to fit into this team, because, you know, the team they were talking about is an all-white team. And I think I see the toll and the impact those constant rejections have on them, because they might be applying with the same qualifications as their white peers, but, you know, they're not getting the same sort of jobs. And that's not because of any fault of them, it's because the biases and the racism that's there in the industries that they're applying to. So I think despite this, you know, they're still applying and still going through with what they're doing, but I think it does take a toll, and you are going to internalize some of that and think, you know, that maybe it's a problem that's kind of internal.
That's a brilliant answer, Ruqia, absolutely. So the answer is yes, but it's not our fault. So it's the experiences that have shaped us, right? So thank you. I would love to put some more questions to everyone, and I think there were a few specific ones in the chat that are definitely worth returning to at some point, but we've reached the end of our session. And I think when I was speaking to all the speakers last week, I was saying this could be a day-long conference, and I'm kind of wishing we had made it a day-long conference because we've learned so much, and we just got to that point of discussing some really interesting issues. But thank you to all of you for taking part in that panel and imparting your wisdom. And it's my job now to round up and close off the webinar. So to conclude, we've heard this evening from women and men who've lived in this country for some time, who are at various stages of pursuing their careers, and in very diverse career paths. And yet I think what we've heard as well is there's some really common chords in our experiences, in our beliefs, in what it took to get us there. So I think those are really worth pulling out and passing on to future generations. So thank you for sharing all those so candidly. And I think it also proved the value of having this discussion. I think a few of you have kindly said, great time for these webinars to really look at these issues. So I'm really pleased that DRI is a part of this initiative, and well done SHCP for having the insight to arrange and to call for something like this for these community conversations. And on that note, I would just remind everyone that the next webinar is on the 13th of January, same time, 6 to 8 on Zoom. And it's on the subject of access to mental health and well-being, which is an issue that we've heard a lot about this evening. So I'm sure that's going to be another really important conversation. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next time, and have a great Christmas in the meantime. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.